Welcome to Coffee and the Bull.
Hey guys, welcome to Coffee and the Bull. Yeah, Mike and John here. We're gonna basically start off with welcome to the shit show. That's where we're at. This is episode 1, where we're gonna give you kind of the rundown of what we're doing, what our goal is, and where we're at on everything. But essentially, the gist of it is, Mike and I have come to the terms with the fact that there's really not a lot of avenues of mental health for men in the problems that we run into in our everyday life, from your marriage to work, kids, the stressors of being husband, father, an employee, or business owner or whatnot. And we're going to kind of give you a rundown of our own individual lives without going too far in depth, because it's going to come into play in other episodes. But essentially, Mike and I have covered the basis of almost everything, minus millionaire, because neither one of us have hit that status. But basically, I've been through several divorces, got a bunch of rugrats running around, and 10 years experience in the military, 5 years in law enforcement, which isn't what we really hang our hats on, but it's given us the life experience.
Right, it plays a role.
Right, to kind of discuss the issues that we have. And before Mike takes over, we kind of came to this conclusion by finding, without intentionally looking for it, but finding a best friend in each other, and realizing that some of the stuff that we let weigh us down to the point that you don't know which way is up. You don't know which way you want to go or how you're going to solve the problem, and so you start looking at the wrong self-help. And we found that in reality, sometimes all it is an ear, just somebody to vent your problem to. And so with that, before we go further in depth, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, let him give you a little rundown about himself.
I started law enforcement in 2016. I've run a business since then, and dealt with some of the financial, honestly, terrors that you have, and just trying to make your ends meet. Whether you're trying to stretch money to last further in the month, and you don't want to go home, empty-handed, and tell your wife, hey, look, I'm sorry I don't have it this month. And so it brought up a session where there's a lot of times guys need help, whether it be, like we talked about, friends bouncing ideas off each other, or concerns off each other, but it being a safe spot to do it, where you're not having judgment coming in. You get some help, you maybe get some help, maybe not, in that regard. But one thing we've learned is there's not a lot of avenues out there that are discussing what we're going to be discussing. Like we've talked about, in the preparation for this podcast, that not every episode is going to be meant for everybody. There's some things that it's going to appeal to you, some things it's not. Sometimes you're like, man, that's interesting, and but the podcast is going to be for everybody. Because there'll be something where we may not be touching your topic right now, but give us 3 or 4 episodes, and we're probably going to hit that sucker with a hammer. What we've seen is that there's not a lot of support in the avenue that we're going down. You get a bunch of the podcasters, hey, I'm a guy, nobody cares about my feelings, and then they leave it at that, as if we're just victims or whatever. And then you got the super alpha males that, are trying to prove how strong they are, just suck it up and keep moving, stop being a wuss, and all this other stuff. And I'm monitoring my language on that. But, it's one of the things where there's an in-between, and that's honestly where you get the best, because you can't take either one of those other. I'm not going to be a victim, but I'm also not going to be a predator. Right. And so it's like trying to find that avenue right down the middle, and like one of the things we discussed is a lot of guys know we need somebody to talk to. If God knows, if you ask our spouses or our girlfriends, or boyfriends, whatever, if we need to go see a therapist or whatever, they're going to support you 100%. The issue is a lot of us, our billfold doesn't support it, and I'm not talking bad about psychologists or therapists or any of that other stuff. They serve a purpose, don't get me wrong, but one thing that I noticed is, if you've got guys that are going to work and they're working overtime, they're spending an extra 10, 12, sometimes 20 hours a week away from their family, they're not going to sacrifice $200 a month of that money to go to to see a therapist. This is just not going to happen, because you're very objective driven.
Right.
And so why would I go spend all this extra time away from my family just to spend more time away from my family to talk to somebody that I don't even know about what I'm going through, And then the other side of it is, you take and we minimize what we're going through. Whether you talk to somebody and then you turn the radio on, you hear the sob story, and that's I want to stress that's not what this podcast is going to be. We're not going to have a contest to see who can tell the saddest story. It's not going to be this big thing of tugging at your heartstrings and all this other stuff. It's just going to be guys living life. We've talked about, we're planning different guests coming on. We've got everything from doctors to just regular, guys who turn wrenches underneath cars, all the way to, guy was on a nuclear submarines for 20 years, And so it's one of the things where it's across the board where it's just normal people living life, dealing with the exact same stuff that you're dealing with,
Right.
Neither one of us are millionaires. We still have to play the game of what bill's getting paid right now. Now, granted, I'm lucky because my wife pays my bills. I have no idea who I owe what to. She knows, but there's also not a lot of padding there for me to be like, oh, let me just go. The financial stress is still evident in my life.
Right.
And one thing we noticed talking to different people is it's evident in all of our lives. Obviously, if you got 17 rental houses, you may not have it as bad. But honestly, when you start talking to some of them guys, they still feel like they've got the same thing. So it's one of the things where it's opened up avenues to discuss life, to see how to eliminate stress in our lives. It's going to be there, but it's how to cope with it. So that's kind of, I think,
Right.
The avenue that we're trying to go with.
And our biggest thing is we're not here with the answers. We're not
Right.
here
We're not doctors.
Right. We're not sending out checks to people. We're not doing anything like that. Our biggest thing was we realized when we started talking to each other about and I still laugh because it was about contact lenses. That was my moment when I realized that we're both idiots and don't change our contact
Right.
lenses out as prescribed. But that was kind of I'm not the only one that does that. But also we noticed in being in leadership positions and being in the roles that we've been in, going to certain calls and for service and stuff like that in law enforcement, you deal with individuals who are at their bottomest that they could get, where the end is the only answer they
Right.
can see.
Right.
And we also started to notice that it's not just the calls for service. It's other cops. It's other, random firefighters or people that we come across. And we started to notice that there's a particular draw to the way that we approach situations and the way that we discuss it, which is kind of our other drive to put this podcast together to get
Right.
out to everybody else that, it's average, normal, everyday guy things. I'm sure Shaq has stressors in his life, but obviously he's not worried about making his mortgage payment on,
Right.
his
Right.
stuff. Not bad mouthing Shaq because that's a big dude. He'd probably beat me up, but it's your guy that's paycheck to paycheck. But unlike Mike, I don't have a spouse that's paying part of my bills or making sure they're all getting paid. I'm that guy that's like, oh shit, it's the second I didn't pay the bill today.
Right, right.
Why's my lights flickering? I'm that guy that the light flickers. I'm gonna go make sure I pay the electric bill because I may have forgotten to pay that thing. I'm also that guy that a week after payday, if I look at the bank account and there's still some money in there, I'm like, what didn't get paid? What
Right.
did I forget? What stupid monetary
What's about
thing?
to break?
Right, right.
Now that there's extra money in the account, get ready for something to go wrong.
Right, because it's never the amount that's in the
Right.
account that needs to go out to fix the problem. And like Mike said, we have a slew of guests that we have lined up. Everything from successful, submariners to recovering drug addicts, guys that have hit the bottom and came back up. Another big thing that I was talking about the other day was the finding that person, like Mike kind of touched on it, that not only is it no judgment, it never comes back up again. It's never I'm going to show you my vulnerability or I'm going to be weak for this moment. And then 2 weeks later, 6 months later, a year later, you're like, hey, you remember that time?
Right.
That's a big one for us because, we open up to a vulnerable side that if you look at society, you've got the alpha male personality that's going to call you weak, tell you to suck it up, move on, and then you got the other side of it. It's like, come and cry with me.
Right.
We're not those types of people. That's not.
Well, and that brings up one of the things that is going to be kind of the focus of the podcast is, honestly, is finding the guy in your life that person can be. And I'm
Right.
saying this, with all the respect I can to my wife, is your spouse can't necessarily be the only person that you go and you disclose some of this stuff to.
Right.
Because it's, she's got to live with your dumb ass.
100%.
And that's and I want to stress, my wife has been with me through, hands down, the darkest moments of my life, and been there, been supportive the entire time. But the other side of that is, if all I ever do is go whine and complain to her about what's going on, then she's got a human side too.
Right.
And in the moments where I need her to be strong and be, for lack of a better term, a sanctuary, what I don't want is to give her where we get in an argument and that stuff that I confided into her comes back. Not that she's being vindictive,
Right.
or
becomes a
trying to be
weapon.
hurtful, but it becomes a weapon because it's not. She's still human in the same way that I am.
Right.
And so what I don't want is that to come up, and then now we have to address that later on, because we're going to. Anybody who's ever been in a marriage knows there's times where you're going to have an argument and you're just going to hurt each other's feelings.
That's the whole argument.
But
That's the whole point
if
of it.
you take and you go down that bridge and you said something serious, you've got to address that now.
Right.
And so what I found is by not confiding everything in her, I'm limiting what we may have to deal with later on when we do have those arguments. And
Right.
and it's living life together. And I want to stress, I'm not downplaying our spouses.
Right.
Your spouse can be supportive and honestly should be, or else you probably need a different spouse.
You're not withholding to hurt. You're withholding to spare.
Right.
Which I think
Right.
is a huge difference. And we've talked about this, about the difference between men and their friends and women and their friends, because an issue that I've run into in my personal life from previous relationships is that you have the female that confides in her friend, and her friend is that ride or die that's like, oh, you're mad at him, I'm mad at him.
Right.
And then they never get the memo that you're not mad, because as most people, we get angry, and that's what we vent about.
Right.
We don't talk about, oh, they're so nice, they're so sweet, they did this for me, they did this for me. It's always that you won't believe what he did to, today. Whereas, as you and I have discussed, when you call or you say, you're not going to believe what your best friend's wife did today, and
Right.
you give me that unload, it's never coming up. I'm never going behind your back. I'm not going to your wife and being like, you're not going to believe what he said about you. And the next time that I go to your house, I'm not looking at your wife going, I can't believe you made him do that.
Right.
I can't believe, because it's,
Right.
number one, firm believer in it's none of my damn business. You're confiding in me so that.
Well, we vent differently.
Right.
And we're allowed to, we pick up on, hey, this is just venting.
Right.
Obviously when I'm mad at my wife, I don't hate her. I hate her in that moment.
Right.
When I first got married, I had an old guy tell me, he said, he'd been married his whole life. And he told me, he said, I absolutely love being married, except for the times I absolutely hate it.
Right.
And that has been, me and my wife have been married for over 15 years now, and it's been one of the most accurate statements in the world, because it's like, I love her to death, but God, there are times where she just gets under my skin.
Right.
And so it's just
I know
one
I
of the
hear
things
about them
where
all.
do what?
I said I know I hear about them all.
Right. And so it's one of the things where you've got to have that guy to talk to.
Right.
But to get us back on track, I know one of the driving forces for us setting this podcast up was, we've dealt with several guys who have honestly just chosen a road of self-destruction, whether it be
Right.
taking their life or leaving their entire family behind, and just where you look around and you're like, what in the world happened? We look at if that's at the end of the road, like obviously life happened to get them there, and so we've gotten that phone call where you just sit there in shock for a minute, and you're like, I can't believe this happened, or what this guy's going through this, and we started looking around, and it's like, all right, so how many stressors happened along the way that
Right.
could have altered where they went, had a detour, like if self-destruction is the end of the road, and that's where he's at, and in a couple different cases, hey, they took their life. How could I have altered that way beforehand?
Right.
Whether it be talking to him about he's worried about his wife cheating on him or whatever, and so I'm able to talk to him there. And as a survivor part of it, you're like, hey, am I a bad friend? It's
Right.
not that you're a bad friend. We don't
you can't fix what
normalize
you don't
talking to each
know.
other,
Exactly.
Right, you know? And so it's one of the things where, you know, especially when you start getting your darkest demons, you don't discuss them with each other, you know.
Right.
And the issue comes in where for lack of a better term, the things that I'm going through, you've probably been through, you know. And a lot of our friends, you know, you tend to hang out with people who are the same as you, and they know you, you know, they've known you, most of them, your whole life or several years or whatever, you know. They're going to know what's going on, but you've got to talk to them and let them know, hey, it's a problem. You know,
Right.
you know, like if I come to you at work and, you know, hey, you know, I've got issues at work, I'm letting you, or issues at home, you're going to pick up on that based on how I'm talking. But we don't ever discuss, or we don't ever approach it from the standpoint of, hey, I'm having a problem, I need some help.
Right. Well, that's where we have to get away from the
Right.
I'm okay mentality that,
Right.
that men constantly go through. When you're a guy at work who may not even be your friend, he may not be
Right.
somebody you regularly associate with, but when he looks at you and he can tell because men are good at reading that body language,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, hey man, are you good? And the answer is yeah, I'm good, or I'm getting by, or I can't complain because nobody would listen anyway.
Right.
That's your moment. That's the hey, this guy's willing to sit down and talk to you and you know, ask what's okay. And we see it all the time, and like I always say, my pet peeve is the guy that after somebody, you know, takes their life is on Facebook, if you need me, call me. And it's like, bro, you missed my call 3 times
Right,
in a row.
right.
Like, what do you mean if I need you, call you? You don't answer when I do call.
Right.
You know, and that's, if you're going to say it, be about it. But at the same time, why wait? Why wait until
Right.
they reach out? Start making your phone calls. And I'm terrible at it. But at the same time, like, I know you, if I go 3 hours without a text or a phone call from you and we're not sleeping, there's a problem.
Right.
And I'm going to start blowing your phone up because I'm like, do you hate me? Is that what's up? Are we
Right.
breaking up? You know, it's there's a fine line that we as men have to break the stigma of not just ourselves now, but also our sons that we're raising into that mentality. You know, and like I tell my son all the time, when he falls down, when he gets upset about things, like, you know, hey, we're not going to cry right now. I know we had that talk when I beamed him in the eye with a baseball, which, by the way, was a good throw. He was just a bad catch. He wanted to cry right there at the ballpark. I know the world is ruthless.
Right.
And I went up, gave him his hug, you know, hey, buddy, this is not the place or the time for us to cry. I got you. We can do this later. I'm down to cry later. We're not going to do it here in public where all your friends are watching.
Right.
Because I'm not going to let your friends torment you for the rest of your life about that time you cried at the baseball game. But later on, we get home and we talk about it. Well, he's, you know, he doesn't need to cry now. He's like, pain's gone. He got a black eye, but my pain's gone.
Right.
You know.
Well, I think it's one of the things where, and that's kind of why we decided to name the first episode "Welcome to the Shit Show," is, you know, there's a moment of realization in life where you realize exactly what the world is around you.
Right.
You know, where, you know, hey, there's not a lot of help for guys that are going through things, and or I'm not going to say there's not a lot of help. We don't recognize that there's not a lot of help. You know.
Right.
And we chose "Welcome to the Shit Show" because, you know, in our line of work in law enforcement, it's one of the things that it's interesting to watch. I don't want to say there's a sadistic mentality of,
Right.
you know, you're waiting for it with the new guys, but, you know, when you have some of the guys who, you know, they just got out of the academy or they just hired on,
Barely 21.
and, you know, they're as green as grass, and they have a moment where, you know, it might be day one. For me, it was day one. My very first call for service was one of these scenarios, and it could be 6 weeks in, who knows, depending on the agency. But it's they have a moment where everything is
epiphany.
going absolutely crazy. You know,
Right.
whether it be a murder, a stabbing, shooting, just an absolute cluster of emotions and everything on scene, and you see it on their face, like it's visible. You can read it like a book,
Right.
And it's they don't know what to do, but also at the same time, like, this is what they signed up for, and you know, it's when the fantasy of what law enforcement is wears away. That's where they're at right now.
Right.
It's no longer the dream of, hey, I'm going to be, you know, this serve and protector type guy.
Right.
It's no, this is what it really is. You know,
Chaos
it's
is
down
taking
and
over.
dirty, and trying to, you know, take a shit sandwich and make something valuable out of it. And you see it on their face, and that's one. Typically, your older guys are always walking, hey, welcome to the shit show,
Right.
and it lets them know that, hey, this is what real life is, or this for us is this is what real police work is.
Yeah, this is
But
the
then
ugly truth
then
of
what
it.
they do is, hey, come with me, and they if your hands are bloody, hey, we go wash off with Germex, or hey, go take a moment and catch your breath and move on from there. But that welcome to the shit show moment is, hey, I'm scared, I'm terrified, I don't know, I'm confused, but it's also a helping hand right there saying, hey, this is how we're going to get through it.
Right.
This is what we need to do. This is how you document or whatever. And when you take that aspect to life, we're all going to have, we got the moments where it's like, I don't know what to do. It could be as a 20-year-old guy, it could be a 37-year-old man, in a hallway, who knows?
Right.
But it's one of those things where you have that moment where you don't know what's going on, and it's that helping hand that comes in.
Yep.
It's where you can make that phone call and say, hey, man, I need to talk. And that's what we've got to start normalizing. That's kind of the reason for where we're going with this.
And you've got to, as individuals, as friends, you've got to tune into that, because you've got to know when your buddy says, man, I had a moment, and they don't want to talk about it. You don't want to push, but you got to give them a little nudge just to get it out so that they know they're not abnormal, that what they're going through is a normal moment. It's a normal situation. Whether you've been through it or you haven't been through it, you got to give them that nudge to know that, hey, for lack of better terms, I'm a safe person, and what's happening here is staying right here, and not to no homo it up, but you got to take them by the hand sometimes, and you got to help them through that situation and go, let me tell you about mine, not to make yours worse, not to one up you, not to give you a sadder story, but to...
And that's what happens a lot of times.
Right.
Is hey, man, suck it up because at least you're not dealing with this. Well, that doesn't help me out at all.
No, yeah.
That doesn't help solve the problem.
Exactly. And hey, guys, John with Coffee and the Bull. Just wanted to say thanks for tuning in and having a listen to today's podcast. As always, like, follow, subscribe, and share. If you want to drop us a line, shoot us an email with your comments, concerns, or anything you want to pop us off with that we can talk about in the podcast. It's going to be coffeeandthebull@yahoo.com. As always, thanks for listening, and hope to see you on the next one. All right. But no, and so that's why as men, we've got to start addressing our friends and start giving them that little bit of nudge to let them know, like, I'm not here to gossip. I'm not going to Bill next door after you're done telling me all your problems. But, hey, this is some of the things I've gone through. And sometimes the answer really is, hey, be patient.
Right.
And it's going to get better, but you got to keep your head up and keep driving. And sometimes it's, well, let's sit down. Or, hey, I've got a buddy whose dad's a pastor. Why don't you go talk to him?
Right.
That, maybe the spiritual aspect of is the answer. And like, I know that when I was going through my divorce and I came to you, that was your avenue. It was, hey, look, I can't help you. I've never dealt with that. My dad's a pastor. I know that your ex-wife, she was my wife at the time, is semi-religious. Why don't you go talk to him? He's non-biased. He's not necessarily her pastor. It's not somebody that you frequent.
He's not on either team.
Right. Go sit down with him. And like I told you, I love your mom to death. She's a saint in my eyes because she made my ex-wife look and feel like the smallest thing in the world for all the trauma that she did. But it's an avenue that if I had never opened up to you, and the only reason that I even got to that brave point in my life is because you were in tune enough to know that my tone of voice in our conversation wasn't right.
Right.
And it was just hey, you need to stop what you're doing. I'm at the house. I'm about to burn something. Just come over. And it was, I gotta, I'm about to eat lunch, or I gotta go get the kids in a little while. And it was, you were like, I don't think you understand. That wasn't an option.
Right.
I'll see you when you get here.
I'm not asking you. I'm telling you.
And to be fair, that was a moment that I realized that I'm not alone. There are people enough who in my life who pay attention enough that I can open up, and on that day I opened up more than I'd anticipated opening up. And I can say by now, everything but I don't think you know my underwear size, but pretty much everything else about me. And we're still, different topics are popping up where it's like, have I ever told you this? And you're like, no, I haven't.
Right.
And we're still uncovering the fact that we subconsciously don't subjugate other people to our traumas if we don't think that they're going to understand that trauma. And then when you walk through that trauma and you have to dial back on yourself and go, can I open up about this to this person? Do they understand exactly the pain and what I'm going through? And honestly, I think that that's where men are starting to suffer, is that we're not opening up to each other.
Right. And that's what, so one of the things that I had several incidents when I first started, or not, the first go round that I had in law enforcement, because I had to take a break for a minute, is I had to go see a couple therapists for some critical incidents, just basic standard, fit for duty type mental evaluations,
right.
and it was in response to critical incidents that honestly they needed that, or I needed that, I needed somebody to check on me or whatever, and I remember going to see this therapist, and I don't know why my department chose her, but it was, I was graded on four things. It was, one of them was, hey, what type of hobbies do you have? Well, at the time, all my off days were filled up with working security details,
Right, overtime
or
details.
doing side jobs, because I needed to make ends meet. We were at a low paying agency, and the bills weren't getting paid. So much like every guy out there, rather than working, I couldn't work overtime, so I was supplementing it where I could.
Right.
And so, I'm not sitting there playing golf or going fishing or kayaking or whatever. And so I failed that category. And then it was, okay, well, what are your sleeping habits? Well, I don't sleep that great. I lay down and go to sleep. I get up so I can go do this job or whatever. And so I was averaging, I'd say at most maybe 4 hours a day.
Right.
And that wears you down. And so I failed that category. And it was like, okay, well, what are your eating habits like? I'm a cop. And so
Right.
it's
I'm
eating
eating trash
it's
as
fast
fast
food,
as I can.
and it's energy drinks and McDonald's is where the money's at. And so it was that, and then what's your spiritual walk like?
Right.
Or your spiritual outlet is how they refer to it. Where are you going to church or whatever? Well, I wasn't.
Right.
Because a lot of the calls that we would go to, it just, that wasn't for me at the time. Like I was struggling at the time, and so I failed all four categories. And so she finished that up with, hey, I don't think you're crazy, but it doesn't matter what you say after that. Like, I feel worse walking out of your office than I did going in.
Right.
And so obviously I never followed up with any type of training or sessions after that, because it's like, I don't need any. I get enough people beating me up. I don't.
Right.
I don't need that.
Well, and that was the same lady that I had to see.
Right.
And she said the exact same thing, except it wasn't, you're not crazy. It was, you have some very unhealthy coping mechanisms, but you'll be okay.
Right.
And it's like, how are you going to tell me that my coping mechanisms are unhealthy, but I'm going to be okay?
Right.
Like, why is that the go-to answer that I'll be okay?
Right.
Like, I get that I'm a guy and I'm supposed to be masculine. I'm supposed to be able to make it through anything, but that's not the right answer.
Right.
And like, when we were looking to start the podcast and kind of running the idea by some of our close friends, that was my three questions was, if somebody said, hey, you should go see a psychologist or a doctor or a therapist or whatever, would you? And then they would typically say, well, I probably need it. And I say, all right, well, if I told you it was free, would you go? And they were always like, yeah, absolutely. When I said, would you do group therapy? It was a mixed review, but mostly no, because they're like, no, I don't want to spill my guts out in front of a bunch of random dudes that don't know me, that I can't trust with that information.
Right.
But therapy I would do if it was free. And the minute I was like, if you had to pay $10 a session, it was like, no, because I got to use that for gas to get there, and I've got to look at the time off of work, and I've got to look at the missed opportunities for details and overtime. And so that was another drive for us, is it's like, we all know that we're a little messed up. We all crack that one offhanded joke.
And it's not strictly first responder related.
No, it's not.
The same things that I find myself struggling with right now, I struggled with when I was turning wrenches in the refineries.
Yeah.
Or when I was sitting in an office, making a salary.
Right.
You still have the same thoughts. It's not strictly first responder related.
No, that's our big push. Is it's for everybody.
Right.
It's we're talking mostly about men for men, because we're men. We're not women. I can't tell you how a woman thinks. Believe me, if I could,
I don't think they can.
No, fair. And to be honest, I probably would have had a marriage that worked if I knew how a woman thought.
Right.
I don't. But it's a podcast we're trying to get to men and tell men where we're at, what's worked for us, and in the hopes that not only can you take something from it, but if there's something that we can say more eloquently or articulate it the right way that you may not have the words for, you can take it to your spouse and go, look, this is what I'm trying to say without starting an argument, but this is where I'm at, this is what I need. That's really the push that we're going to. And at some point we are going to cover the stigmas of marriage and the battles that you fight with your wife about leaving your dirty socks on the floor. It's a constant battle. I brought that one up on purpose.
Yeah.
There's struggles that are going to happen, and we're going to cover everything as it comes. We're going to talk about incidents in our lives that have affected us. I know for me, we're going to be talking about a shooting that took place that I was involved in. We're going to talk about Mike's marriage, not mine, because clearly I suck at them. That's why I'm on like divorce number 900. Parenting. Parenting is a big one. You know,
Right.
I've got several children. Mike's got one son. Does a lot of I call it community parenting, because you got, you know, your niece you're constantly taking care of in a good way. That's not a negative. And that young lady that you babysit from time to time,
Right.
who's got a hard life, or harder than normal life. And so, like, the parenting aspect, the struggles of being a good dad and teaching your son.
Well, there's
to
a
be
lot
a
of
good man.
fears coming in as a father.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
again, we'll address that, you know, in
As that
future
podcast
episodes.
comes
You know,
up.
it's going to be something that is going to be very, I don't want to say entertaining, but it's going to be very engaging.
Right. Right.
You know, it's the different conversations that we've had with it. It's going to be, that's a very large field to play ball in.
It is.
You know,
It is.
and so, but I do want to bring up, you know, again, this is the first episode, so let's answer a couple questions. Why did we go with Coffee and the Bull as being the title of our show?
So the thing was, and it wasn't as big as the thing that you always say to me, which we'll cover in another episode called "Hey, You Got a Minute," which is Mike's cue to me that he just needs me to shut up and listen. Which, ladies, if you come up with a cue, we might shut up and listen and not give you a solution to your problem. Just saying. But Mike drinks coffee. I drink Red Bull. You can sponsor us anytime, Red Bull. And so whenever we ever needed a moment to sit down and talk, that's usually what it was. Mike would have a cup of coffee, and I'd have a Red Bull, and that's kind of where we came from, just coffee and the Bull.
There's nothing more sophisticated than that,
Right.
Unfortunately,
It is a basic,
you know,
most simple.
it was a simple thing, but what it is, especially in South Louisiana, you know, a cup of coffee is a community. You know, they actually have a coffee company called Community, because it's, hey, you sit down, you have a cup of coffee with your family or your friends,
Right.
and
Also,
you sit down and
Community
talk.
Coffee will take a
You know,
sponsorship anytime.
You sit down, and you have a conversation.
Advertising,
That's
babe.
the purpose of the
Right.
drink, you know. And so, so for us, it's when you do have when you get that person that you talk to, it's, hey, let's sit down, have
a
something
cup
to
of
drink,
coffee. Yeah.
and by the time you finish drinking whatever it is, you're most likely going to hit a topic that needs to be discussed.
Right.
You know, if you're actually having conversation. Now, if you're sitting there playing, you know, on your phone or something like that, it's a different thing. But when you sit, you know, we've lost that ability in society where we don't sit down and actually have conversations anymore. We're playing on Facebook or TikTok or, you know, whatever you know, outlet
Game
you
is
have
on
there,
your phone,
you know,
yeah.
and you're so distracted by that, you're not paying attention to the guy who's drowning next to you,
Right.
who just needs somebody to alleviate some of that and not necessarily solve the problem. Like, we've had the conversation several times where we know guys are objective oriented. You know, like we you know, give us a problem, we'll find a solution. But sometimes you're so worn out in finding that solution, you just need a moment to refreshen your, you know, sharpen your axe type thing. You know,
Right.
where you know, you'll get to the bottom of your problem. You'll solve the issue. But you just need that moment to refresh yourself, or maybe even get a little bit of advice on a different way to tackle it, and then you're good to go.
Right.
And that's what we've got to be to for each other.
And sometimes it's just I need to talk as much garbage and trash about this problem aggressively and just get it off my chest, so that when I'm all done, you look at me and go, bro, that's shitty.
Well, like when you work on a car, you know, you're underneath it,
right.
and you're busting your knuckles, turning wrenches or whatever. And I remember as a child hearing some of the most colorful language I've ever heard in my life coming from underneath the hood of a pickup truck when my dad's underneath it.
Right.
And I'll stress, I love my dad to death. He's not a mechanic. And so you just hear the banging and the clanging, and I'm like, I know that's not a scientific way to fix whatever's wrong with that vehicle.
Right.
But that hammer hitting at the right spot at some point made him feel better. And then
Right.
all of a sudden the problem was fixed, you know. It was something, it most likely something simple. You probably had to turn the key to turn it on. But
Right.
for whatever reason, we had to hop under there with a sledgehammer and start cursing at it.
Right.
You know, and so it's one of the things where sometimes it could be foolish, but just having a moment of just venting or whatever can make all the difference in the world. And that could change life for somebody that you're bumping shoulders with every day.
And you know, the big takeaway from today's episode, as we start to wrap things up, is, you know, this episode may have come off as a little bit, you know, sporadic, all over the place, not very well organized. It's because we want to get as much of it out of there as we can, and I promise we'll be a lot more organized on the next episodes. But we just wanted to let everybody know kind of where we're going, what we're covering, why we're doing what we're doing. But be prepared, because we're not telling you, you know, we're gonna sell the soft, sentimental side of everything, because that's not the case. Because sometimes that's just not the solution. But between now and the next episode, start thinking about that. Look for that guy that you can, you know, if I call you up at 2 a.m, whether it's to cry on your shoulder, to go bury a body, or defend the honor of my family, that dude's gonna answer that phone. You might have to call it 2-3 times, get him to
wake
answer,
him up,
but that dude's gonna get, yeah. What are we doing? Whose car? Like, okay, yeah, I got it. No fingerprints.
Right.
You know, that's it's a weird relief when you find that person. And I promise you, if you ask anybody who knows Mike and I before these episodes start coming out, who's ever walked paths with us, who's ever had conversations with us, this isn't the type of mentality or person that we would be per se. But this is a monumental discovery by the two of us that there is a need for opening up and getting some of these traumas and troubles out of your life and your mind, so that you're not another statistic. You're not another, you know, number on the increased suicide for men, or whatever the term is.
Or maybe not even that much. Not another guy who's looked at as a dedebeat dad.
Right.
You know, because hey, you lost your mind on your wife. Y'all had an argument. And I'm not justifying domestic violence or whatever, but just having a moment. You know, you're driving home and you're mad at your wife, and you know World War III is going to take place when you walk through the door. So you start separating yourself from them, and the kids are involved. And we've seen that happen to too many guys where they had a happy life, and because different things were going on, they wound up separating themselves and not repairing the damage that was repairable in their marriage.
Right.
You know, and so it's one of the things. But again, we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe, guys. If you know, give us a couple episodes, and I think you're really going to find that this could be valuable.
And look, check out the email. It's going to be coffeeandthebull@yahoo.com. If there's anything that you think should be addressed, something you want to talk about, hit us up. Send the email. We're not going to be able to cover everything, you know, in every single episode or go through every email, but we will print it off. We'll read the email, however we got to do it, and we'll cover that topic. Or you may get a response that says, hey, not this next episode, but the one right after it, we got you.
Right.
So bear with us on that aspect of it, because unfortunately we're not cyber tech super, you know, savvy in that aspect. But we both put our pants on the same way, and we're both guys at the end of the day, so we got that aspect down.
That's all I got.
Yeah, I gotta say it.
Toodaloo.